The Neanderthal didn't lose to us. We're still arguing about whether we beat them at all, and the more we learn, the worse the question gets. Picture a man stepping out of the trees in what is now southern France, about 50,000 years ago. He's 5 feet 5 inches tall. He weighs about 180 pounds, and almost none of that is fat. His chest is barrel-shaped. His forearms are thicker than the thighs of most modern men. His brow ridge casts a shadow over eyes that have seen more dead animals than you'll see live ones in your entire life. He's carrying a wooden spear with a stone point lashed to the end, and he knows exactly where to put it. He could break your arm without trying. He could run down a horse and kill it with that spear. He could survive a winter that would kill a modern American in 3 days. And his brain, by volume, was bigger than yours. This is the human race we wiped out, or absorbed, or outlasted. Nobody is entirely sure which. And the deeper the science goes, the more uncomfortable the answer becomes. For a long time, the cartoon stuck. Neanderthal meant brutish, slow, stupid. A failed branch on the family tree, the version of humanity that nature tried and discarded. That image came from a single skeleton found in France in 1908 that happened to belong to an elderly arthritic male with a hunched posture from joint disease. The paleontologist who described him, a man named Marcellin Boule, drew the rest of the species from that one broken body, the hunched walk, the slack jaw, the ape-like stance, all of it wrong. All of it stuck for half a century. The real Neanderthal stood upright. He walked the same way you do. His brain averaged about 1,500 cubic centimeters, which is roughly 100 cubic centimeters larger than the modern human average. Whatever that extra space was doing, it wasn't nothing. And he was not a failed experiment. He was the dominant human in Europe and Western Asia for over 300,000 years. To put that in perspective, our species has existed in our current form for about 300,000 years total. The Neanderthal had the same run we've had so far, and he had it before us. So how did this happen? How did a creature that strong, that adapted, that successful, end up gone from the planet while we kept going? To answer that, we need to start with what he actually was. Neanderthal, properly Homo neanderthalensis, pronounced Neanderthalensis, emerged from a population that left Africa long before our species did. His ancestors walked into Europe somewhere between 600,000 and 400,000 years ago. They settled in, they adapted, and what they adapted to was an environment that would kill a modern human almost immediately. Europe, during most of the Neanderthal's reign, was an ice age, not the cartoon ice age with woolly mammoths against a clean white backdrop. The real one, a patchwork of frozen steppe, tundra, scrub forest, and glacial valleys. Winters routinely hit 20 below 0 Fahrenheit. Summers were short, brutal, and full of biting insects. The animals were enormous: mammoths, woolly rhinos, cave bears that stood 11 feet tall on their hind legs, cave lions that were 25% larger than the African lions in zoos today, and the smaller game, the deer and horses and aurochs, ran fast and hit hard. To survive this place, the Neanderthal body became a specialized machine. His ribcage was wider than ours. His lungs were larger, which helped him pull more oxygen out of cold, thin air. His limbs were shorter and thicker, which conserved heat by reducing the surface area where it could escape. His nose was enormous, with internal chambers that warmed and humidified incoming air before it hit his lungs. His shoulders could rotate with the force of a baseball pitcher, except a baseball pitcher who could do it 50 times a day without injury. His hands were broad with stubby, strong fingers, the kind of hands that crush, not pinch. and his muscle attachments tell a story that still spooks anthropologists. The marks on Neanderthal bones where the tendons met the skeleton are deeper and broader than ours. That means the muscles attached to them were larger and stronger. We can calculate from those attachment points roughly how much force a Neanderthal could generate. The answer is that the average Neanderthal male was probably 30 to 40% stronger than the average modern human male. Pound for pound, that's a power difference that nothing in our species comes close to. Not professional athletes, not soldiers, not the strongest people you've ever met. Imagine standing across a campfire from him. He's not tall. He's looking up at you slightly, but he's wider. His neck is thicker than yours. His forearms are the size of your calves. He smiles, and his teeth are bigger than yours too, worn flat at the edges from a lifetime of chewing tough meat and using them as a third hand to hold leather while his actual hands did other work. This was the human you would have met in Europe 50,000 years ago, and here's the part that still doesn't sit right. He wasn't dumb. The Neanderthal made tools, not crude rocks, refined ones. The Mousterian tool industry, named after a cave in France where the first examples were dug up, is a sophisticated approach to stoneworking that requires planning, technique, and the ability to teach. A Mousterian flake is struck from a prepared core in a specific sequence with specific angles to produce a sharp blade with predictable properties. You don't figure that out in a single afternoon. You learn it from someone older than you, who learned it from someone older still, going back generations. He cooked his food. The hearths in Neanderthal caves show controlled fires, used over and over in the same spot for tens of thousands of years in some cases. He made glue. Birch tar, manufactured by heating birch bark in a low-oxygen environment, was used to attach stone points to wooden shafts. Producing birch tar requires temperatures of about 650 degrees Fahrenheit, sustained in a sealed container. The Neanderthal figured out how to do this at least 200,000 years ago. We're still not sure exactly how he did it without a pottery vessel to seal the process. But he did. He buried his dead. There's still debate over how ritualized the burials were, but in caves like Shanidar in Iraq and La Chapelle in France, Neanderthal skeletons have been found in deliberate positions, sometimes with stone tools placed near the body, sometimes with what looks like floral remains, though the flower pollen interpretation has been challenged. At minimum, he didn't leave his dead where they fell. He took care of them even after they couldn't return the favor. He cared for the injured. The Shanidar 1 skeleton found in northern Iraq in the 1950s belonged to a Neanderthal who had been blind in one eye, deaf in one ear, missing his right arm below the elbow, and lame in one leg. He lived to roughly 40 years old, which in Neanderthal terms was elderly. He could not have hunted. He could not have defended himself. Someone fed him. Someone protected him. Someone made sure he lived. That is not the behavior of an animal. That is the behavior of a person. And there's more. Pigments. Red ochre and black manganese, ground into powder and used to mark cave walls. In a cave called La Pasiega in Spain, red lines and dots and a hand stencil have been dated to at least 64,000 years ago. That predates the arrival of modern humans in Europe by at least 20,000 years, which means the painter wasn't us. The painter was Neanderthal. He was decorating the dark places of the earth before our species ever set foot on that continent. He may have spoken. The hyoid bone, the small horseshoe-shaped bone in the throat that anchors the muscles used for speech, is nearly identical between Neanderthals and modern humans. The FOXP2 gene, which is involved in human language ability, is present in Neanderthal DNA in the same form as ours. He probably talked. We don't know what his voice sounded like, but the equipment was there. Now think about all of that together. A predator who was stronger than you, who could survive winters that would freeze you in hours, who made glue, who cooked, who buried his dead, who painted on walls. who probably spoke, who hunted in groups and brought down animals the size of school buses with nothing but wooden spears and an understanding of how prey moves. This is the deadliest human race that ever lived, not because he was the most violent, although he could be, not because he had the biggest weapons, although he had to get close to use them. He was deadliest because he was the most complete. He was a self-sufficient, adaptable, intelligent killing machine wrapped in human empathy. The combination has never been repeated, and the way he killed is its own chapter of the story. The Neanderthal didn't ambush from a distance the way our ancestors learned to. He didn't throw the spear, he drove it. The bone trauma patterns on Neanderthal skeletons are nearly identical to the injury patterns found in modern rodeo riders. Broken ribs, healed fractures in the neck, damaged forearms from absorbing impact at close range. This was a hunter who closed the distance to within arm's length of a 6,000-pound animal and pushed a sharpened stone into its lungs. Think about the kind of nerve that takes. Picture yourself standing 12 feet from a bison that weighs as much as a Ford F-150. The animal is panicking. Its hooves are the size of your face. Its horns are coming around at the speed of a swinging bat. You have a wooden stick with a rock tied to it. Your job is to step inside the swing, plant your feet, and drive that point through hair and hide and muscle until you find the lung. If you miss, the animal kills you. If you flinch, the animal kills you. If your spear breaks, the animal kills you. This wasn't a sport. This was Tuesday, and he did it over and over. Some Neanderthal skeletons show so many old healed injuries that anthropologists have compared their bodies to career boxers. Broken collarbones that fused crooked, skulls with depressed fractures from glancing kicks, spines compressed from absorbing falls. He took the damage. He kept hunting. He brought the meat home. Then he did it again the next week, and the week after, for 30 years if he was lucky. So how did we beat him? That question is doing a lot of work, and most of it is wrong. We're not even sure we did beat him in the sense of direct confrontation. The honest answer is that nobody knows exactly what happened in the 5,000 to 10,000 years where our species and his overlapped in Europe and Western Asia. There are theories, there's some evidence, there's a lot of guesswork, and the picture that's emerging in the last 20 years since we started reading Neanderthal DNA is stranger than anyone expected. For most of the 20th century, the leading explanation was simple. Modern humans were smarter. We had better tools, better social structures, better language. We outcompeted him for resources, and he starved out. Clean story. Easy to teach. Mostly wrong. The tool gap, when you actually look at it, is much smaller than the old textbooks claimed. Late Neanderthal tool industries in places like France show clear signs of innovation. Pendants, bone tools, decorative items. Some of these may have been borrowed from modern humans who were arriving by then, but some of them appear before our species shows up, which means the Neanderthal was capable of cultural change on his own. He wasn't a static species that couldn't keep up. The social structure theory ran into a different problem. We've found Neanderthal sites with evidence of long-distance trade. Stone from quarries hundreds of miles away, shells from coasts they didn't live on. That requires social networks. That requires the ability to plan, to negotiate, to trust strangers from other groups. The Neanderthal had that. And then there's the DNA. In 2010, a team led by a Swedish geneticist named Svante Pääbo, pronounced Pääbo, finished sequencing the first complete Neanderthal genome. What they found, when they compared it to modern human DNA, changed everything. Most living humans, everyone whose ancestry traces outside sub-Saharan Africa, carry between 1% and 4% Neanderthal DNA. That number isn't an accident. It isn't background noise. It's the genetic signature of interbreeding. Our ancestors and Neanderthals met, and they had children together, and those children survived and reproduced. The descendants of those children are watching this video. You may be one of them. If you have European, Asian, or Native American ancestry, statistically, you're carrying genes that came from a Neanderthal who lived between 50,000 and 60,000 years ago. Genes that affect your hair color, your skin, your immune system, your metabolism, your sleep patterns, possibly your susceptibility to certain diseases. The Neanderthal didn't fully die. Part of him is still here, embedded in the cells of about 2 billion living humans. So when we ask how we beat him, the question itself starts to wobble. Did we replace him, or did we absorb him? Did we kill him, or did we marry him? Both probably happened. Neither one was the whole story. What seems to have actually occurred is closer to this. Around 60,000 years ago, a wave of modern humans began moving out of Africa into the Middle East and from there into Europe and Asia. They met Neanderthal populations that had been living in those regions for hundreds of thousands of years. The two species interbred. The hybrid children sometimes thrived and sometimes didn't. Some Neanderthal genes proved useful in non-African environments and got passed on. Others didn't and faded out. At the same time, the climate was changing. The last ice age was entering its most volatile phase. Temperatures swung wildly over short periods. The kinds of animals the Neanderthal had specialized in hunting were shifting their ranges, or going extinct, or thinning out. The forests advanced and retreated in the span of generations. Neanderthal populations, which had always been small and scattered, were being squeezed. And then there was us. Modern humans had certain advantages the Neanderthal lacked. Our long, thin limbs, originally adapted to African savannas, were terrible for cold weather, but excellent for running long distances. We could chase prey over hours, exhausting animals that the Neanderthal would have ambushed at close range. Our smaller frames needed fewer calories per day. In a world where food was getting harder to find, that difference compounded. The calorie math is colder than it sounds. A Neanderthal in winter probably needed somewhere between 3,500 and 5,000 calories a day just to keep his body running. That's the food intake of an Olympic swimmer in training, sustained for life. A modern human in the same environment could probably get by on 2,500 to 3,000. The difference doesn't sound dramatic until you multiply it across a band of 20 people across a winter that lasts 7 months. Modern humans needed a smaller hunting territory. They could support more children per square mile. They could afford a bad week without watching someone die. The Neanderthal couldn't. We also had something else. We had networks. The archaeological evidence suggests modern human groups maintained relationships across much wider distances than Neanderthals did. When local resources failed, modern humans could move, trade, or take refuge with distant relatives. Neanderthals seem to have lived in tighter, more local family groups. When their region failed, they had nowhere to go. The combination was lethal, not in the sense of war, but in the sense of slow demographic erosion. Neanderthal populations shrank. They became isolated. They inbred. The genetic diversity that lets a species absorb shocks dried up. By around 40,000 years ago, Neanderthal numbers were collapsing. By around 35,000 years ago, they were essentially gone from the fossil record. Pockets may have hung on in southern Spain or remote valleys for another few thousand years, but the species, as a species, was over. There may have been violence too. We don't have a lot of evidence for it, but we have some. Skeletons with cut marks that look like injuries from sharp tools. A few cases of what might be cannibalism, though it's hard to tell whether those were Neanderthals eating Neanderthals or modern humans eating Neanderthals or just complicated burial practices that look weird to us. The dominant story isn't war, it's attrition. If you were standing on a cliff in what is now southern France 38,000 years ago, watching the last band of Neanderthals walk through a river valley below you, you wouldn't see a defeated army. You'd see a family, maybe 15 people, a few children, an old woman who remembered when there were more of them. A young man carrying a spear that looked from a distance almost identical to the one you were carrying, because by then we had picked up some of their techniques, and they had picked up some of ours. They were not extinct because they were inferior. They were extinct because the world they had been built for stopped existing, and because we were there at the wrong moment, and because the math of small populations is unforgiving. Here's the part that still gets me. The Neanderthal had a 300,000-year run. We've had a 300,000-year run so far. We are now at exactly the point in our own story where his ended. We don't know what comes next. He didn't either. The bones in Shanidar cave, where the blind, one-armed Neanderthal lived to old age because his people fed him, are some of the most powerful objects in any museum I can think of. Not because they prove anything dramatic, because they prove something quiet. That this other kind of human, this stronger, tougher, older kind of human, took care of his own. That he loved, that he buried his dead, that he was the kind of being whose loss, even at 40,000 years of distance, still feels like something to mourn. He was the deadliest of us, not because he killed the most, but because losing him made the rest of us alone. For the first time in 2 million years, the planet had only one kind of human walking on it, us. No cousins, no rival branches, no other version of what a person could look like or sound like or live like. And we still carry him, in our DNA, in our immune systems, in the way some of us handle cold or sleep or process pain. He didn't disappear. He sank into us. He's still in there, watching, in a way, through our eyes. We didn't beat the Neanderthal. We finished what was already happening to him. And then we kept his genes, the way you keep a photograph of someone you couldn't save. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.